Welcome back to another episode of Gateway Spotlight, a series focused on current issues impacting international higher education in the United States and around the world. My name is Harvey Charles, and I'm the host of Gateway Spotlight. I've been in the field of international education for more than 30 years, having served as SIO and Professor of International Education at multiple institutions across the U.S. Today's conversation is inspired by the fact that the field of international education is relatively new, and in many respects, we are still trying to find our way and cement our place in the academy. It's also inspired by the reality of the unprecedented and difficult challenges we currently face, both in the field and within higher education in general. But mostly, it is inspired by the fact that there is a wealth of valuable perspective among many of the pioneers of the field who are now retired, but still engaged with the profession and eager to share their experiences. We will have a chance today to sit at the feet of our proverbial elders and listen to their insights on where the field has been, how they might navigate the new challenges confronting the field today, and their thoughts on where the field is headed. We're joined today by William Brustein, most recently the Vice President for Global Affairs at West Virginia University, but having spent time in similar roles at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the Ohio State University, and the University of Pittsburgh. Before assuming roles as an SIO, William served as Director of European Studies at the University of Minnesota and Professor and Chair of the school's Department of Sociology. He continues to be a prolific scholar in the fields of sociology and history. Our second guest is Jane Edwards, who served most recently as Dean of International and Professional Experience at Yale University. She's occupied senior leadership roles in international education at Harvard and Wesleyan universities as well. And our third guest is Jenny Saman, recently serving as Senior Director of Global Health Programs at the Association of American Medical Colleges, where she founded a network of medical schools and teaching hospitals to enhance global medical education. Dr. Saman remains an active consultant in both international and global health education. Before we dive into our show today, let's have a brief word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Gateway Executive Search. Looking for your next international education leader? Choose Gateway Executive Search. Hiring the right leader is pivotal to advancing your institution's global engagement. At Gateway Executive Search, the search team has held leadership roles in international higher education and brings that sector knowledge into every search. Gateway Executive Search identifies and secures qualified senior and mid-level international education leaders through cost-effective, customized searches, including interim leadership and support for ongoing recruitment efforts. We encourage you to visit the link in the chat to learn more. Now, back to the show. So, we have with us William, Jane, and Jenny, and I would put to you a question that I think all of us would probably want answers to, and that question is, considering everything you now know about international education and where we are at this historical moment, if you had to redo your career, what would you do differently? And maybe we can begin with William.
Great. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. I would just list two factors to begin with. One is that as an SIO, in many ways, we serve as the so-called Secretary of State of the university. We spend a lot of time traveling. But if I had to do it again, I think I would have spent more time on campus justifying the purpose of this travel. I mean, for many of my colleagues, it was unfortunate. They said, "Oh my God, you're going to such exotic places like Shanghai, Beijing, New Delhi, Mumbai, Sao Paulo." But perhaps what they didn't understand, because I didn't spend enough time on the campus, is how these trips benefit the institution, benefit them as faculty, as staff, the benefits to the local community. And so that I would have spent more time doing. The second thing is that near the end of my last stint as an SIO, I really became aware of the great pay inequity within the Office of International Education.
Mhm.
We would have people who had titles such as mine, vice president or vice provost or associate vice president, earning a fairly good income. But then we'd have people working so hard in international student advising and education abroad who were really at a subsistence level or even below that. And
Mhm.
I would have spent more time realizing, sure, there are obstacles with HR and they have these pay scales
Mhm.
for certain levels, but more time making the case to kind of correct that pay inequity and enhancing the pay compensation for my staff. Those are two things that I would have done differently.
Great. Thanks, William. Jenny, would you like to offer some perspective on the question?
Sure. So nice to be with everyone here today and be with my fellow panelists. Thank you. As I look back on my international career, I realized that I sort of happened and stumbled upon it. But in retrospect, I think it was probably a pretty good strategy. So throughout my higher ed career, I had the opportunity to work in ESL and study abroad as an international student advisor and admissions and recruitment. And so I really had the experience in all of the areas that I would eventually lead. And I think that was a tremendous benefit. So I think one thing in retrospect is don't be afraid. Don't put yourself into a niche and decide that this is my area of expertise and this is the only thing I'm going to become an expert on, because it can be extremely valuable to see the interconnectedness between the various components of international education in a campus setting, if you've had an opportunity to dabble in all of them. So I think that accidental journey might be something that I could have planned had I known where I would actually end up. And then I think similar to what William has just explained, I think I would have spent much more time understanding and cultivating the relationships with faculty on campus. We often tend to spend a lot of time with our own staff, and then as needed with various departments. And then, of course, so much of it is external. But I think developing strong and close relationships with faculty who are like-minded, and I like to call it to find your tribe, to find people who are as passionate about the work that you do, because they can help to amplify your message. They can be our emissaries. And if we're the Secretary of State, as Bill has proposed, then they can be our ambassadors around the university to really help us advance our agenda. So I think those would be my two takeaways.
You know, Jenny, on the last point you made, I like to remind my colleagues and also faculty that faculty are actually the principal agents in advancing internationalization. It's not the SIO, it's actually faculty. And so you're absolutely right in talking about the importance of strengthening those kinds of ties and those engagements with them. Jane, would you like to give a shot at the question?
No, great pleasure to be with colleagues here and to be with you all out there in Zoom land. Um, when you ask me about my career, it's always been a problem when I did informational sessions and so on, because the way that my life was shaped is completely useless to anybody else's any kind of model. I fell into international education completely accidentally because I'd finished my doctorate and didn't want to go the promotion and tenure route like William. I was pretty much the only other qualification I had was that I had been an international student. I was at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was qualified to be an international student advisor. So I got myself a job at UPenn. And then I followed husbands around the United States. Harvey mentioned, yes, Harvard and Wesleyan, but I went from UPenn to Harvard following a husband, and then from Harvard to SUNY Potsdam. and from SUNY Potsdam to the University of Hartford, where I taught, and then to Wesleyan, and then to Harvard, and then to Yale. And this makes no sense as a strategy of any kind. And so what I was sort of thinking about, which would be useful to people who are entering the profession now, is that I have no regrets whatsoever. I wouldn't redo anything because it gave me this extraordinary breadth of experience and astonishing opportunities to collaborate with colleagues in different countries and in very different kinds of institutions. But I would suggest that if I were trying to rethink it now in this bizarre moment, I was just reading, as I'm sure all of you were, in the Chronicle of Higher Education this morning. I read the Chronicle a lot, and I would suggest that anybody who's in international education read a lot of stuff. Not just the Chronicle and NAFSA and all the rest of those things, but Kwakwareli-Symonds about rankings and The Economist, whatever you can think of to bring this onto your campus. But as I was reading this morning, I thought, how on earth does one think about formulating a career in international education at a moment of such global challenge? And I think one of the things that was useful to me, and I was not able to act on it, was thinking about where I was driven by the work. I really believed in international education. So my question for myself, and my suggestion that anybody's question for themselves should be, what is the work that you really wish to do? And in what kind of institution do you feel you can make the greatest contribution? And if you go in that direction, I think that it can be enormously rewarding to be opening doors for people.
Thank you so much, Jane. And you're so right in talking about the type of institution where you may wish to work. I have worked at a range of different institutions within higher education, and I actually consider that one of the strengths that I bring to the table. And it's you can have very different experiences at these different types of institutions. Before we move to our second question, I'd like to remind our guests to go to the Q&A portal with questions you may have, and we will try in the last 10 minutes of the show to answer them as best as we can. So please submit your questions or comments in the Q&A portal. So the second question, what skills and insights do you believe are indispensable for SIOs to succeed in their current roles today that may not have been as important 30 years ago? And Jenny, maybe you'd want to get us started on this one.
Sure. Well, I think that first and foremost, it's really important. We've talked about the current global context and the national context. And I think it's really important to be mindful of the critical work that global education plays in the education of everyone. It's so important nationally and internationally. I think there are a lot of skills that have always been important, but I think especially now, the art of communicating, both verbally and in writing, is critical. I think it's really important to be able to distill these many ideas we have in our heads and the passion that we have in our heart about international education, distill it in a way that it is accessible to various audiences. And so this takes some time, especially if you're maybe not such a great writer, or you're a great writer, but you're not so proficient orally. So I think we have the need to communicate in multiple modalities. This is a great example, doing podcasts. This is a whole new way of communicating. But to internal and external audiences, I think in the past we've sort of thought about our own local newsletter or magazines to alumni, but more important than ever, I think right now, is our external audience as well. And for external, I mean your local community, but also beyond that. So I think that whole art of communication is critical. And then going back to relationship building, I was thinking about there are some natural relationships we build on campus. We've talked about that with the faculty. I think in these times, there are some other relationships that are really essential, and some that we might not necessarily think about. One is the librarians. Librarians are researchers. They are helpers. And in this time when we have the laws changing just as quickly as the days pass, we need someone we can turn to who is able to do that deep research. If you're writing something or you're getting ready to give a talk, you want to have the most current data, or you may want to have historical information. And so they can be a tremendous resource and an ally for you. And in the meanwhile, you are building part of your coalition on campus that are in supporters of global education. So I think librarians are often overlooked. I think the other area is, of course, building those relationships, not only with the professional schools that we have, but helping them to help you reach out to those employers that are hiring the students, because everybody wants a globally ready workforce. So again, this is another way of thinking about developing those relationships, because they know they rely on international students or globally ready students, and you can help to be part of that funnel. We know that in the US, 25% of our physician workforce is international. And so we play a really critical role in connecting globally, locally with the global community. So I think those, again, relationship building and perhaps some different areas, and the communication would be my top two things that we really need to emphasize in this context.
Thank you, Jenny. Jane, thoughts?
Well, Jenny has sort of said it all, which makes it easier for me. But I would say that thinking about skills that are necessary today and looking at the way that my colleagues, with whom I try to collaborate on every possible level in every piece of the institution, I really believe that the ability to collaborate and to foster collaboration among others is one of the most important elements in higher education, and that it doesn't happen as often as it should, particularly between the administration and faculty, but also between, I mean, every institution is different, but it's very easy for the finance people not to have the faintest idea why they should be concerned about the financing of global education. And so the ability to make people understand, as Jenny was saying, the importance of this work seems to me to be very important. But there's another thing that I think, and this is from looking at a lot of different institutions, not only my own, but all the ones with whom we have collaborate and all the ones abroad with whom we have partnerships. How about management? Serious about this. Most people who go into international education are not management specialists, nor should they be. But there is a tremendous amount that can be learned about how to manage effectively, which makes the work better. I mean, I know the words strategic planning are anathema to everybody in higher education. Actually, somebody taught me to, actually, the VP for the executive VP at Fairfield University at that time, taught me the basics of strategic planning when he was at Wesleyan. And I have used that in every imaginable way, because it's a way of bringing people who don't necessarily share anything around tables together and having them leave with an understanding of each other's work and how to work together for the benefit of the institution and the faculty who drive these programs intellectually and the participants. Sorry, I will stop my tirade right there.
No. Thank you, Jane. William?
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about skills and insights. And again, building on the great comments that Jenny and Jane made, one is certainly to be able to accomplish more with less. It's going to be so important now, because let's not fool ourselves that the resources that we'll be receiving, whether externally or from within the university, are going to be fewer. And therefore, we have to be very skillful in terms of how we employ those resources. Second thing is adapt. Adaptability is going to become so important in this age, because things are changing so quickly with AI and how AI is going to affect what we do in global education. And thus, you have to be really quicker today on your feet than perhaps we needed to be 10, 15 years ago. Entrepreneurial, again, because there are going to be fewer resources out there. Whether it's the alumni cultivation, friends, grants, just continually look for those resources, because the more you can bring in, as I've learned over my experience, to the international education sector, the more you can leverage that internally in the university to have that matched. So that's going to be a very important skill. And then just again, building on much what Jenny and Jane said, coalition of the willing, coalition building. Jenny and Jane, you talked a lot about the coalitions we should build and sustain within the institution. I'd like to just take that out a bit and say also within the regional and local community. More and more, we're going with the perception out there that people asking, what's the value of our universities of higher education? What's the value of international education? We need to do a better job of building coalitions with sectors outside of our institution, with the local community, with the corporate community, with local governance. And so I would certainly add that. And the final thing I would say is not so much a skill, but it's an insight. Let's be sure not to fall into the trap that those who think about international education only think of that what we do is about student mobility. Yes, that's very important, but we're talking about comprehensive internationalization, and that goes beyond that. And so we don't want to be seen as just a one-trick pony. We want to be seen as that there are many facets to what we do. So I would mention those things.
William, your reference to the importance of being adaptable and flexible actually aligns very well with the next question that I have, which has to do with the fact that these are dark days for U.S. higher education. There are so many challenges that are internal to the university, such as budgetary challenges, enrollment challenges. And of course, William, you talked about the importance of being entrepreneurial. So, you know, that I think is a necessity to respond to some of these challenges. But there are also challenges that are external to the university, such as geopolitical concerns. And you know, as we speak, the Middle East is aflame. The very thing that many of us feared is actually happening right now. And so, what are some of your thoughts about how SIOs can more effectively navigate some of these challenges, both internal to the university and external? And are there specific contributions that SIOs can make to impact the conversations occurring on campuses that may not otherwise be present in the current discourse? And you know, I'm asking because I really believe that international educators bring a unique perspective to bear on what happens at the universities where we serve. So, Jane, would you like to begin in responding?
Harvey, this is so huge and difficult and complicated. And you know, I should say that my background is in anthropology, which means that cultural anthropology. So I've always been disconcerted by the extent to which we assume that everybody, you know, we have this lovely narrative about people being the same globally. You know, all human beings are alike. And if you spend enough time with cultural anthropology, you have some questions about that. But what I think that the question of an SIO being able to, I mean, the constant talk of return on investment in higher education at the moment, and the lack of Yale currently has a committee on the question of trust in higher education and how it has eroded in recent years. And I think one of the things that the SIO can do is provide really good information, knowledge-based, data-based, assessment-based information about the way that things are shaped and about the relationship between any institution's well-being and the global environment, and also the partnerships which have been built frequently without people even really understanding elsewhere in the institution the extent to which these partnerships with international organizations and with other universities are in fact core to the value of the education that they're providing and let's say, to the research, heaven knows. So I think one of the things that international educators need to be doing at this time is documenting, so that it's not able to be contested, the daily value of the global engagement of our institutions.
Thank you. Jenny.
Question indeed, as Jane said, and a very complicated landscape at the moment. I think we have to begin by acknowledging that the current state of affairs is not normal. It is not part of our history and of welcoming the immigrant, welcoming the refugee, welcoming the international student and scholar, and hiring our international expertise. So I think it's really important to just start with that. We may feel it, we may express it to our friends and family on a regular basis, but I think as a leader on campus who has this position of global engagement, we have to begin by that. I think we need to find ways in which we are at the table. Find opportunities for you to attend meetings where you continue to help people understand that what we're doing is not ancillary. It is not an add-on. It is not optional, especially in these times. It is crucial. It is essential. And I think the ability to convene folks who might not normally not be convened is really important as well. The ability to pull people together who across campus and in the community, as William has stated, leaders in the community, business people, to come together to have these very difficult conversations, but to lead those conversations about how do we feel? What are the values? And bring people in who are actually experiencing the anxiety and the I guess the whims of our current federal government, those who are scared to go home, those who have people who are stuck somewhere else. I think we need not to speak for others, but we need their voices to express their own situations and their own experiences. And we can be conveners we could be conveners of not only international students and scholars, but international faculty. And so that role of remembering that we have that reach across campus and otherwise, to have these really difficult conversations, but to surface it so that then it can organically come from the people that the work we do is so essential.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And William, your response?
I think you're on mute.
I think you're muted.
So sorry. It's always been part of my modus operandi to go out and with whomever I meet, whether it's within the university, a dean, faculty, department members, outside of the university in terms of civic leaders, to first ask them, what are their key priorities? What's important to them? And especially today, given what the so-called choppy waters out there, is to listen to them, and then in the discussion, in your conversation, be able to draw upon how international can help them fulfill their goals. Mm-hmm. And so always looking, at what are the major priorities, the interests, the missions of those with whom you're in conversation with, and then to be able to build that bridge by saying that what can help you reach your objectives here is a partnership with the international dimension of the university. So that to me is going to be ever more important. A second thing I would mention is that let's go out and look at some of the best practices, successful practices, particularly today, in terms of how we did get some recent victories for the higher education sector and how that was done. And I'll just point to one, and that was the recent reestablishment or restoration of NIH funding that Congress restored to NIH. And how did that come about? Well, it came about through a coalition of scientists, people from the health sector, from the private sector, from the university, coming together, joining together, coming up with a plan, again, to explain what was at risk here if NIH funding was not restored and why it's important. And they were successful in convincing Congress to restore it. So, looking at those best examples out there, and there are some. And then finally, I would mention civic responsibility. I always think of the project that we have here in Pittsburgh, where the university works with the University of Newcastle and working on a joint project where both universities took the leadership in bringing together the outside community because of the similarity between the two regions, Northern Appalachia, Northumberland in England, post-industrial areas, but particularly focusing on ways that they could learn from one another to improve the livelihood, particularly the health outcomes of people in these two regions, and how that won such popular support and even initial funding from the regional community. So again, think of best practices, think of the civic responsibility, the coalitions, and I think that that will help us during these dark days.
Thank you very much, William. And I have to say that all of the responses that you have provided to this question, I think underscores how critical it is that SIOs and international education leaders be very intentional in getting out on the campus and making the case, precisely because the field of international education is so new. And there are so many people on the campuses we inhabit who know very little about what we do, yet all of us understand how critical it is to the universities we work for and represent, the work of international education. So without repeating what you've said, I simply want to underscore how rich and meaningful these responses have been relative to the fact that as SIOs, we have to make the case. We have to try as best as we can to insert ourselves in critical conversations about the challenges our universities face and how best our institutions can respond to these challenges. And we certainly have much to offer, frankly, in this regard. We're nearing the end of our time, and so I guess the question I would go to here is I'd like for each of you to share with us two considerations that SIOs should keep in mind as they work to make international education transformative on their respective campuses. And the operative word here is transformative. William, would you like to begin?
Let me just put forward two things. One is, again, I mentioned a little earlier, AI. In terms of, let's get ahead of the curve here and thinking about how we can use AI to improve whether it's international student recruitment, international student advising, but also the other facets of international education, because we don't want to be left behind. AI is going to be playing a very important role here, and we need to get out there to understand it and to be able to find ways to make it work for the growth of global education. A second thing, again, is just to be entrepreneurial and adaptable. We may even have to rethink the framework of international education, because this might be just one of those, junctures where, international education in the years to come is going to be very different from what it has been in the past. So again, I think the adaptability, entrepreneurial, going to be so important in the years to come.
Okay, we're at almost 11:35, and I think I'm going to pivot to the questions because we have a number of questions, and I really want to give our guests a chance to respond to them. The first is, when is a good time to retire? What should I be doing ahead of retirement? Jane, you want to take that one?
Well, don't do it in the middle of a pandemic would be point number one. Um, I would say that that thinking about retirement is indeed, I think it is the single biggest transition for a lot of people in their entire lives. I don't know about the rest of you. I've been driven for the last, 4 or 5 decades, never been without a job, never had time that I could dedicate without thinking about it to things that I was simply interested in. So I would say that that a good retire is when you feel that you might not be doing things with as much energy. Or for me, it's the question of, oh God, this is rolling around again. This is because you do those things in your life. But I would say that that allowing yourself to actually stand back, think hard about this, and talk a lot about it before you actually do it, and then make yourself a plan for how much you wish to remain engaged or how much you wish not to be engaged, and that's a good place to start.
Jenny, did you want to
Yeah,
thank Jane? Jump right in, Jenny. Yes.
yes, I would just say that William has talked about asking people about their priorities. I think we need to ask ourselves, in the remaining time that I have, what are my priorities and how will I be able to shape those? And I think that helps to make that decision. And I think the other thing that Jane touched upon is that retirement doesn't mean you are no longer engaged in the field. I mean, look at the three of us. We don't have full-time jobs still anymore, but I bet you we're still very engaged and very busy. And so I think for some people, there's the thought of, if I retire, what am I going to do? Am I going to just golf all day long? And that word is absolutely not. It actually frees you to be able to pick and choose your passion projects. And so it doesn't have to be quite as scary or as final and like divorcing you from the field at all. It allows you to engage in different ways. So for me, it's been wonderful.
Thank you, Jenny. So another question, is there a profession of international higher education? I would say yes, there is. And in fact, there is the seminal text in the field is the Handbook of International Higher Education. So, I would encourage the questioner to maybe Google that, and you would find a ton of information that tells you quite a bit about the field. So the next question, really interesting. When imagining how one would structure an international office or international education, what are things one should consider? I think that is too much of a question to answer in this forum, given the time constraints. But there is a second question from this guest. This is coming from a small liberal arts university. What are some challenges you all faced when breaking down silos across your campuses? And I'm really curious to maybe get one or two responses to this latter question. Challenges you faced when breaking down silos across your campuses. William?
Uh-oh. Um, that's a tough one. Well, from the beginning, in terms of my years as an SIO, I always tried to present the international education, what we do in the international office, as not a silo. That what we do is both vertical and horizontal, and that um, if you look at the key missions of the universities, and particularly universities that I was at, which were kind of like or major research universities, flagships, is that the missions of research, teaching, and service, and that what international education does is it strengthens or enhances each of those. And so always the conversation was about the more comprehensive university rather than the different silos. We have to understand that people, particularly having me, I've served as a chair of a department. I know how the incentive system is one where you're rewarded for things that your department field contribute to your discipline. So certain times that makes it even more difficult to uh, uh, break through. But again, efforts to demonstrate that what you do at the university level can also benefit you in your individual department, in your individual college, to make that argument.
Thanks. Thanks so much, William. A next question is, it seems the profession has moved from generalist to specialist over the years. What are the specializations needed going forward? Anyone would like to volunteer to respond to this?
Oh, what are the specializations needed? I take the question to mean as an SIO, what are the new kind of emerging specializations? I
Yes.
think one of them is this notion of breaking down these current silos, even in an international office. I think the ability to be a systems thinker, one that can think, as he said, William just said, horizontally, vertically, deep, broad, wide. But even the way in which we set up these offices, like if you had a blank slate, you were starting a new institution, you were going to start a new international office, would do we need to have these siloed offices of this one does study abroad, education abroad, this one does international students that are coming in, or can we think in a more holistic and a broader kind of way? So integrative thinking, systems thinking, and an ability to integrate and pull things together that maybe at this point stand alone, but need to be integrated so that the whole structure and the incentives and the funding and the whole way we set things up is in a much more integrative and systems kind of manner is what I think would be helpful in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Jane, did you want to offer a perspective on this?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Jenny said, because I feel as if I've spent my whole career trying to break down silos. And what happened, the best example of how this works well is when I arrived at Yale, I was on a floor where there was career strategy and then there was study abroad, and those people never talked to each other at all. And so we created collectively a center where we brought together study abroad, Yale summer session, career advising, and all of the fellowship stuff, including postgraduate fellowship. And everything changed for the people who were using these services once we had done that, because people knew. I mean, if you walk into an advisor's office and you say, I want to study abroad, do an internship. Oh boy, if that person actually knows how you might think about pursuing this, and that gives you an educational experience which really is better for both the people managing it and for the participants. So I would say that you look and you help, as you already said, Jenny, that helping people understand that the rewards to them and their division, as well as to the institution, can be gained through that kind of collaborative work.
Yeah, I would quickly add, I give a talk. I used to give a talk at the SIO Academy about the role of the SIO. And I would talk about the role in terms of various metaphors and the different hats that the SIO wears. And I guess the point I want to make is that the SIO is not a specialist. The SIO truly is a generalist. Jenny talked about the importance of convening people. William talked about the importance of entrepreneurial activity. And those are just two examples of things that SIOs actually have to feel fairly comfortable doing in order to succeed in their respective roles. So I just want to make the point to this questioner that even if other specialists may exist in an Office of International Education, and certainly we know on the broader campus, the SIO themselves must be able to do a variety of things to be effective. So moving to the next question, and maybe we try to get one last one before we have to conclude. I've struggled managing younger people. Expectations are very different. Any advice? Would any one of you like to respond to this?
Again, it's managing younger people. Was that the
Yes,
question?
I've struggled managing younger people. Yes.
Oh my God, having kids who are Gen X or I mean Gen Zs. What is it now? Gen Zs or Alphas? I think you know. I always think about the fact that during the years that I was lecturing quite often as a professor, having children who were preteen and teens, just conversations with them to find out, get a better understanding of the world as I saw it, and being able to bring that into my lectures. So I think going out there and talking to people is so important if you want to be able to engage, younger people in the field. Get a sense of where they're at and what's important to them and how to communicate, the best means to communicate with them.
Well, thanks, William, and we'll have to leave it there. Thank you to our guests, William Brustein, Jenny Saman, Jane Edwards, and thanks to everyone who joined us live or on replay. Stay tuned for the next Gateway Spotlight, which I believe will be happening on April 1st. So thank you very much, and see you next time.